The auditorium at Refuge Chapel was full that Sunday morning, the kind of full that made the ushers prop the back doors open so the overflow could stand in the courtyard and still hear the service through the speakers. It was the church's 16th anniversary, and 2,000 people had come to celebrate 16 years of a ministry that started in a rented hall with plastic chairs and a leaking roof. Pastor Comfort Adeyanju stood at the pulpit, 30 minutes into a message about faithfulness, about staying planted, about the danger of uprooting yourself in a season when God had not yet released you. And then, without warning, she stopped. She looked toward the front pew, toward a woman in a deep green dress the congregation knew as well as they knew Comfort herself. "Blessing," she said, "come and stand up." The room shifted. Blessing Namdi rose slowly, her eyes searching Comfort's face for some clue about what was coming. Comfort smiled, but the smile did not travel all the way to her eyes. "Tell this congregation," she said, "that you are not leaving Refuge Chapel." 2,000 people held their breath at once. Blessing looked at the woman who had raised her in ministry, the woman she had called pastor for 12 years and mama for almost as long, and said the only true thing she had left. "Pastor, I already told you my answer." Silence took the room the way water takes a low place. Comfort's expression did not collapse. It simply changed, the way a face changes when it realizes, in front of everyone, that it has been asking a question whose answer it already knew. Before we go back to where this began, if you love stories that make you feel something real, hit subscribe now, because what led to this moment is a story you will not forget. Let's go back. This was not a woman trying to control a congregation. This was a woman who had already buried the man who built that congregation beside her, and who was now watching the last person who still needed her walk quietly toward a door marked exit. 16 years earlier, there had been a rented event hall where the rent was cheap because the roof was bad, 30 plastic chairs arranged by a woman who counted them twice to make sure there were enough, and a man named Comfort Adeyanju who preached to whoever showed up, whether that was 30 people or 3. Comfort was Emmanuel's wife, and on Sundays she was also the usher, the choir, and the cleaner who stayed behind to sweep the hall and count the offering by candlelight. She had married a man with a calling and understood, the way certain women understand things without being told, that the calling would require both of them. There were months she stretched a pot of stew across a week, sewed her own choir robes on a borrowed machine, and turned away her own hunger so there would be enough for whichever member's child needed school fees. Emmanuel would find her at the kitchen table, counting coins into envelopes labeled rent, light, offering, seed, and ask why she carried so much on her own shoulders. She always told him a house built by 2 hands stood steadier than one built by a single pair. They grew slowly. 30 chairs became 100, and 100 became an auditorium. They built Refuge Chapel together, brick by brick, for 21 years. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday morning, 5 years before the anniversary service where this story began, Emmanuel collapsed in his study while preparing a sermon. By the time Comfort reached the hospital, the doctors were already speaking in the careful, padded voice reserved for news that cannot be softened: a stroke. Sudden, nothing anyone could have prevented. The funeral filled the auditorium, the way only a funeral for a beloved man can. Comfort sat in the front row in black, and the congregation waited to see whether the woman who had built the church with him would fold beneath the weight of building it without him. She did not fold. 3 weeks later, she stood at the same pulpit her husband had stood at for 2 decades, and she preached, her voice shaking for the first 2 minutes before it steadied. Refuge Chapel was not going to close its doors. What the congregation did not see was what the church quietly became for Comfort in the years that followed. It stopped being only her husband's legacy. It became the one place where hundreds of people needed her to be exactly who she was every single Sunday. At home, There was a house that had grown too quiet, a wardrobe still holding a dead man's suits, a side of the bed she still avoided. A woman who has learned to survive by being needed does not always notice when that need has quietly become the only thing holding her together. Blessing Namdi came into Comfort's life 7 years before Emmanuel's death, when she was 19 and had been attending Refuge Chapel for less than a year, ushering quietly, arriving early, leaving without lingering to be noticed. It happened during an ordinary altar call, when a weeping woman near the back was surrounded by people trying to help. It was Blessing, still in her white usher's blouse, who knelt beside her and began to pray, simply, in a voice too settled for a girl her age, until the woman went still. Comfort was standing close enough to hear it. Afterward, she found Blessing folding chairs in the corner of the hall. "Who taught you to pray like that?" she asked. "Nobody, Ma," Blessing said. I don't know. It came out." "It doesn't just come out," Comfort said. "Come and see me on Wednesday." That Wednesday began 12 years. Comfort taught her how to study a passage until it gave up more than its surface meaning, how to build a sermon that moved a room without manipulating it, how to counsel a grieving widow, how to stand in front of people who did not want to listen and hold their attention anyway. She corrected her sharply when she needed correcting, once making her practice a shaky first devotional 4 more times in one evening until her voice found its floor, and defended her fiercely when older members muttered that a girl her age had no business on that platform. Within a few years, the shy usher who once folded chairs in silence was preaching from the same pulpit her mentor had claimed after Emmanuel's death. "This is my daughter," Comfort would say, an arm around her shoulders, and the congregation would clap the way people clap, for something they genuinely believe in. If you had watched them together in those years, laughing between songs, finishing each other's scripture references, you would have called it one of the most beautiful mentorships you had ever seen. You would have been right. And that is precisely what made what came later so difficult to watch. The trouble did not begin with sabotage. It began with something smaller: independence. Somewhere in her late 20s, Blessing stopped asking Pastor, "What should I do?" before every decision. She began accepting outside invitations without running the dates past Comfort. Ministers began calling her directly. The board began calling her the next Comfort, a phrase members repeated with pride, not realizing what it would cost. Comfort smiled every time she heard it, telling herself this was exactly what 12 years of investment was supposed to produce. But something in her had quietly begun to change too. A small, persistent fear she never examined closely, the fear of a woman who had built her entire second life around being necessary, watching the one person who had always needed her most slowly learn that she didn't. Blessing met Emeka Obi at a leadership conference in Abuja, at an assigned lunch table. He was a software engineer, not particularly interested in titles, and when she told him she preached, he didn't shift into the careful register people usually reserved for clergy. He asked what she preached about that actually excited her. When she paused, he said, "Take your time. I'd rather hear the real answer." They talked for 2 hours. He made her laugh in the specific way of someone who found her genuinely funny, and at some point, he asked her a question no one in 12 years of ministry had thought to ask. "What do you want?" he said. "Not what the church needs from you. What do you want?" Blessing did not have an answer. She realized she had spent 12 years becoming exactly what everyone expected, and no one, including herself, had ever paused to ask what she wanted underneath it. That question did not leave her. Neither, in time, did Emeka. She brought him to Lagos to meet Comfort 4 months later. Comfort was warm, motherly, thorough with her questions. Emeka answered everything respectfully. Nothing went wrong, exactly. Comfort hugged him when he left. It was Rose, Comfort's oldest friend, and the church's administrator, who noticed the silence that followed. "You don't like him," she said. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Comfort insisted her hesitation had nothing to do with Emeka personally, speaking instead about discernment, about protecting a gift as significant as blessings. There's something about him, she said. I can't fully explain it. It was, on its surface, the language of spiritual caution. Underneath it was something far more human, the language of a woman disguising a fear she did not want to look at directly. The fear arrived in full when Emeka was offered a senior position in Toronto and told Blessing he wanted her beside him as his wife. Blessing was excited and afraid, not of Emeka, but of building a life outside the only structure she had known since 19. She told Comfort the same week. Canada, Comfort said, testing the word for weight. Yes, ma. And Refuge Chapel? I don't know yet. Those 4 words settled into Comfort like a stone dropped into still water, sending out ripples that would not stop moving for months. What followed did not look, at first, like sabotage. Comfort began scheduling Blessing for conferences with unusual frequency, nearly every one falling on a weekend Emeka had planned to visit. Emeka noticed, but did not confront Comfort. Instead, he told Blessing he didn't want her to choose between him and the work she loved, which made the situation harder rather than easier. Comfort also began speaking to board members, not in accusation, but in the careful language of concern. I'm worried about the timing, she told them. I think Blessing may be distracted from what God is doing in her. She never said a harsh word about Emeka. She did not need to. Rose confronted her again. You are not protecting her anymore, she said. Then what am I doing? You're protecting your place in her life. Comfort refused it, insisting she had every right to be concerned. The sermons began not long after, about gifts abandoned in their season, about callings traded for comfort. She never once said Blessing's name, which made it worse, because everyone understood exactly who she meant. Blessing sat through each one, composed, while the congregation glanced at her and looked quickly away. After one such Sunday, she found Comfort alone and closed the door behind her. If you have something to say to me, Pastor, say it to me, not to the whole congregation. I am trying to save you from a mistake. What if it isn't a mistake? The question hung in the room longer than either expected. It was the moment Comfort understood that Blessing had already decided, and that everything she had done since Toronto had been an attempt to reverse a choice that was not hers to make. The final break came when Blessing formally requested a sabbatical. Comfort delayed the paperwork twice. It was Rose who eventually told her the truth, that Comfort had been speaking to the board for months, shaping decisions Blessing was never told about. What broke inside her was not disagreement. It was the discovery that the woman she trusted above everyone had been working against her quietly, in rooms she was never invited into. I thought she was teaching me how to become a woman, she told Rose. She was teaching me how to remain her daughter. Which brings us back to the anniversary service, to Comfort asking the young woman she raised in ministry to deny, in front of 2,000 witnesses, a decision already made. After everything we built, she said, why are you doing this? Because you taught me to stand. A pause, long enough for the silence to deepen. And now that I am standing, you are angry that I can walk. Elder Michael rose and moved toward the platform, ending a service that had gone somewhere no one had prepared for. The congregation filed out in a hush thick with whispered questions. Blessing left, through the side entrance, without speaking to anyone. Comfort remained on the platform long after the auditorium had emptied. Within the week, Blessing had resigned from every position she held, quietly and completely, without a single public word against the woman who raised her. Attendance dipped in the weeks that followed. A few young ministers she had mentored drifted toward other congregations. Comfort's office sat undisturbed, her chair empty, old photographs of the two of them still on the wall. One evening, alone, Comfort watched the recording of the anniversary service again and again, pausing each time on the same frame, her own face in the second after blessing answered, when the smile had not yet fully left it, but the certainty behind it already had. That night, in front of an old photograph of Emmanuel, she finally said it aloud. I told myself I was protecting her, but I was protecting myself. I didn't want the church to need her without needing me. I taught her to become my successor, and then I became afraid of what it would mean to actually become unnecessary. It was not a comfortable realization, and it arrived too late to undo the damage, but not too late to do something honest with what remained. 3 weeks later, Comfort found her at the small flat she shared with a cousin. She did not come as pastor. She left her Bible in the car. I am sorry, she said. I spent 12 years teaching you how to hear God's voice, she continued. And then I got angry when his answer for your life wasn't the one I wanted to hear. I am not asking you to stay. I came to tell you that you were never wrong to go. The following Sunday, Comfort stood before the board, not to explain herself, but to correct what she had done. She told them plainly that Blessing had been called to something beyond their walls, and that her own concerns had come from fear, not discernment. Then she recommended formally and in writing that the church support Blessing in establishing a sister ministry in Toronto, placing her name behind a future she would have no hand in shaping. The airport that October morning was ordinary in every way except one. Comfort came alone, without an entourage. There was no dramatic scene, no final attempt to extract a promise. She simply embraced her and said the only thing that mattered. Go, she said. I didn't spend 12 years teaching you how to stay. I taught you how to go. Blessing embraced her again, longer this time, and neither needed to say anything else. 1 year later, in a modest rented hall in Toronto, Blessing stood before a small but full congregation and preached, not as Comfort's daughter, not as Refuge Chapel's assistant, but as herself. I want to honor someone, she said, who taught me how to serve before I understood what serving even meant. In Lagos, in the same office chair she had sat in the night she watched her own failure on repeat, Comfort watched the live stream and smiled. Not the tight, defended smile from the anniversary platform, but something looser, something that no longer needed to be in the room to belong to what was happening in it. Being needed, she had finally learned, was never the same thing as being loved. And releasing someone was not the same thing as losing them. Sometimes, it was simply what it looked like to have finally succeeded. If this story moved you, you already know what to do. Subscribe and stay close, because there's another story waiting for you right now. Someone out there is about to learn the same lesson Comfort did, the hard way.